Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time of day it is where you are right now. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing fine, thank you for asking. We're starting a new series, and this is just about the weird and the mysterious and all the things that I like to read about, and I'm putting them on YouTube and I'm going to talk about them. Our very first one is leaded gasoline and leaded paint, and how it led to an epidemic of crazy people, and how it changed generations of people, and how it, I think, may have created more serial killers. Because if you look at today's generation, the people who are in their, late teens, early 20s now, they're not doing the same things that I did in my late teens or early 20s. I am part of the Goonies generation, as I've heard it called. I am in between 1975 and 1985, so I'm old. But I'm here to talk about lead. So my generation is the last real generation that was affected by lead in things. So I grew up in the 80s, and there was still lead in gasoline. There was still lead paint in homes in the 80s, and especially in Canada. I'm in Canada. I think the last leaded gasoline station was gone in 1992, because I remember being a kid and you could get leaded or unleaded gasoline. And I was like, oh, that's so weird. And people were still picking the leaded because of certain things that we are going to get into in this video. Editing Josie here. So as I was looking for pictures and videos to put into this video so you're not just watching me the whole time, I discovered this. Apparently, it is not completely banned in the US. You can get leaded gasoline as long as you only use it for racing. So it's 110 HP or 110 HP. It's provided by Downs Energy, and they get it from VP Racing. So some gas stations in the US still have leaded gasoline. Well, it is banned on public roadways. It's not banned for racing. I know, isn't that crazy? Whereas like racing, like NASCAR and stuff, got rid of it in 2007, but you can still somehow buy leaded gasoline for your race car in the United States in 2025. I just thought that was an interesting piece of information, and now we're going to get back to Video Josie. This one's a little bit longer, so maybe like grab a snack, grab a coffee, just grab a coffee. Glass of wine. I don't drink, but glass of wine. That's part of why I don't drink. Anyways, no, I'm kidding. All kidding aside. Grab a cup of coffee or a snack or whatever you're gonna do, and let's get into this. Let's get in. Josie took notes to leaded gasoline and leaded paint, and how it may have contributed to a more daring, crazy, murderous population for a very long time. The dangers of lead for human beings: brain damage, kidney damage, reproductive issues. It's especially harmful to children and pregnant women. In adults, it causes cardiovascular issues, brain damage, nerve disorders, and decreased cognitive performance, kidney function decrease, reproductive issues in men and women, including lower sperm count, headaches, stomach cramps, constipation, muscle and joint pain, trouble sleeping, fatigue, irritability, and low sex drive. It's so toxic to humans because exposure is through inhalation, ingestion, or even having the substance on your skin. Your skin will absorb it, your body will absorb it, it goes directly to the bloodstream and then wreaks havoc on your entire system. Young children absorb it 4 to 5 times more than adults do. So it's even more deadly to little kids. Now, where did all this lead come from, Josie? Well, first off, it was put in paint. Lead paint was a thing for a very, very long time. And they started putting lead in paint in the early 1900s because one, it was very anti-corrosive, and two, it had a quick dry time. And you could also get some really cool colors with it. They ended up replacing it with zinc oxide. So zinc oxide you can have cool colors with. It dries quick. It's kind of what paint is made out of today. So at some point in the early 1940s, manufacturers actually started taking the lead out of paint. Now remember that date, the early 1940s, because we're going to get into leaded gasoline. And so if manufacturers are taking the lead out of paint in the early 1940s because they knew it wasn't a carcinogen, they knew it was bad for people and that people were getting really, really, really sick from it, just keep that in mind. Okay, keep that in mind. So from 1940 to 1978 is when the zinc oxide started being used. In 1978, the US government banned it from consumer use altogether. So there's a very big difference. Consumer use and industrial use is two different things. Two different things, okay? So in industrial settings, it's still used to this day, but very rarely. But workers are protected. So they have protective clothing, they have protective measures put in place so the workers don't get exposed to the lead. Canada, actually in 1976, they did a hazardous goods act or hazardous goods bill and added it to the hazardous goods thing, lead paint, not leaded gasoline, lead paint. But Canada didn't right out ban it till 1990. So, even though manufacturers had pretty much stopped using it in house paint in Canada and the US, I'm not sure about the rest of the world. I know it's still used in some places. It was banned. It was banned here in North America. Altogether, if you have a house after 1990 in Canada, you know for sure that there is no lead in your paint, or if you renovated after 1990. It's kind of like the same thing that happened with asbestos, but that's another video. So lead is also still used in some ammunition, some batteries, very rarely in plumbing. I think in Canada, there's been a couple bans with certain materials. I know there's certain piping that was banned here too because it just falls apart. Reno's not here right now for me to ask because he's a plumber, but I will mention what those are. Editing Josie might pop in here, okay? Editing Josie here. So Reno is home and he has informed me that lead is still used in plumbing in some cases. It is used in soldering. Not for water pipes, guys, so don't worry, not for water pipes. This is for gas pipes, for like threaded pipes. There's a compound used in the threading in gas pipes, not water pipes. It is also used in old toilet flanges on the floor. So it's not used anymore in water pipes. If houses are 50, 60 years old, there is still lead used in those pipes because they're old pipes. And once they're replaced, they're not. Like, think Flint, Michigan. They changed their water supply from the lake, I think it was Lake Erie they were getting it from, and they changed it to the Flint River, and the Flint River was more corrosive, so it started corroding the pipes, which were made out of lead, which then leaked into the water supply, which hurt people, and that's why they don't use lead in pipes anymore. They haven't for over 50 years. And plumbing, actually, funny enough, PB is the chemical symbol for lead, and that's where plumbing gets its name, from ancient pipes and stuff that were made out of lead. Plumbing. Anywho, back to video, Josie. Lead is also sometimes used in certain ceramics where you're needing a very high level of anti-corrosion. That's the only time lead paint is used, or lead in paint, or lead in an industrial application. You can no longer get it in normal people stuff. So there's that. There's that. That's lead paint. We have just talked about lead paint at this point in time. We're going to get into leaded gasoline, and this is, when I was reading about this, I was like, oh, hey, corporate greed. Every source I used is going to be in the description. I also used some of the AI little facts that come up when you Google things now. Just bear in mind that I do believe that the only reason lead was in gasoline was corporate greed. And once you are done this video, let me know in the comments if you have come to the same conclusion after the hours of research I did about this. Everything pointed to corporate greed. It was just, that's why we had leaded gasoline for so long, was corporate greed. Let's get into it. In 1921, General Motors had a man working there named Thomas Midgley Jr. He told his boss, Charles Kettering, he found an additive that would reduce engine knocking called tetraethyl lead. It was highly toxic and first discovered in 1854. Okay. So his boss, Charles Kettering, was the guy who designed the self-starter 10 years prior, and he wanted to go to GM with this solution to engine knocking. Engine knocking was a huge problem back in the day, so much so that for women, they made electric cars because women didn't like the engine knocking, okay? So they actually had electric cars back in the 1920s, 1910s. That's another video. And I think that's a whole thing that... Anyway, let's not touch that right now. So, Charles Kettering encouraged Thomas Midgley to find an additive. He found tetraethyl lead. That's where we are right now. Midgley tried a lot of different additives from melted butter, Kemper, ethyl acrylate. I'm probably saying that wrong. Aluminum chloride. These are just a couple of the things. It went from melted butter to aluminum chloride to try to stop the knocking. Josie, what causes engine knocking, you're wondering? Aside from spark plugs and not enough oil and all those kinds of things, back then it was because the fuel oxygen mixture wasn't good enough and the fuel wasn't burning hot enough. It had a lower octane. So octane is the fuel's ability to boom, to ignite, with the spark, which is the spark plug, and the air, which is brought in through your intake. Air, fuel, spark, boom. Same reason we get fire. So in your engine, you're essentially lighting teeny tiny little fires, and it's a combustion engine. Here's the kicker with all of this. After all the things he tried, ethanol was the one that worked the best. Okay? But there's always a but when it comes to ethanol. And it comes to corporate greed. There's always a but. Ethanol couldn't be patented. Okay? GM couldn't control the production of the ethanol gasoline. Oil companies hated it, saw it as a threat to internal combustion. Because, get this, ethanol was actually being used to power certain vehicles back then. So ethanol was being used instead of gasoline, instead of electric. They were using ethanol. A clean burning, well, probably not clean burning, better burning than gasoline. Okay, nothing burns clean. Everything has some sort of residue when it burns. It's just part of life. The lead that was added to the gasoline reduced the knocking the same way the ethanol did, right? But the oil companies and GM could control the lead. They could patent the lead because it was chemically a little different than lead. Unlike ethanol, the tetraethyl lead could not be used as a fuel source on its own. I know, We're getting more into corporate greed as we go, aren't we? Here's where it gets even more interesting, okay? For years and 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 years, decades, we had lead in gasoline, okay? And oil companies, big oil, like DuPont, said they didn't know it was bad. They didn't know it was going to kill people. They didn't know it was going to cause birth defects and make crazy people and create serial killers. But in 1922, one of the executives of DuPont pretty much said tetraethyl lead is colorless, sweet-smelling liquid and causes lead poisoning immediately. 1922. They would later deny that they knew tetraethyl lead caused poisoning. Here's where everything just goes downhill, okay? Even more so than it already has gone downhill. Here's where everything goes downhill. Keep in mind, this is 1923. We still had lead in paint. Okay? 1923. The first tank of leaded gas is sold in Dayton, Ohio. Midgley, remember Thomas Midgley, the guy who invented it? He wasn't there because he was sick with severe lead poisoning. He was in bed and had severe lead poisoning and couldn't be at the grand opening and the grand selling of the first tank of leaded gasoline because it almost killed him. Then in 1924, so a year after this happened, the Standard Oil Refinery in 1924, so this is the Standard Oil Refinery in New Jersey, had 5 workers die of lead poisoning because they were refining the gasoline with the new tetraethyl lead in it. Public Health Service in 1926, after investigating all of this and taking their sweet time and all the other things, it was over a year-long investigation, says there's no reason not to sell leaded gasoline as long as the workers who are producing it are protected when it's made. So as long as the workers who are producing it have the protective gear and have all the bells and whistles to make sure they're okay, you can sell it to the public. You can sell it for public consumption. It didn't just kill 5 people. Who cares? That's fine. Nobody cares. Corporate greed. In that same report in 1926, it was stated that exposure levels might rise over time. So the longer you sit there with this leaded gasoline and it's burning over there, I'm being exposed to it, over time those levels are going to rise. It's not just a one and done kind of thing. Scary. So by the mid-1970s, there was growing concern and evidence and data that this was dangerous. This was really dangerous, and we need to stop this now. The EPA, so Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, had a year-long fight. Some people call it a discussion, but I feel like reading about it, it was more of a fight to convince producers to start phasing out lead in gasoline and to find something else. Ethanol, which they already knew, which we now have in our gas to increase the octane with ethanol. Ethanol. It only took how many years? 80 years for that to happen. And I think that's because by the time 80 years has gone by, everybody has these combustion engine vehicles that can only run on gasoline. They can't run on ethanol unless you modify them. You know what I mean? I think that's why that happened. Because in the long run, they see an entire population with gas cars, with gas vehicles. What are you going to do, right? The effects of burning lead in gasoline are still felt to this day. It was eventually phased out, but in 1992 in Canada was the last round of leaded gasoline. And I remember the very last station in the city I live in was either Mohawk or Husky. I can't remember what the station was. They both had very similar logos. Was the last station that had leaded gasoline, and it was on 26th Ave. And there are your hints as to where I am. So kids and adults and all of these people who were exposed to leaded gasoline, it causes systematic neurological injury in people, especially in kids. So, see where we're going with this? It causes lower IQ, hyperactivity, behavioral problems, learning problems. Lead exposure in children is linked to violent crimes in adults. Okay? Wow. So if you really look at it, this is just personal, a little personal anecdote. When I was 16, 17, 18, I was awful. Most of my friends were awful. Our parents were just kind of out there. Think about it. So if I was little cray-cray and my parents were part of the hippie generation, they're boomers. They were the ones that went out and took all the risks and did all the crazy stuff. And then my generation, Gen X and us Zennials and some millennials and the Goonie generation, and I think millennials to a certain extent. If you're born after 1992, it doesn't really count. You're not part of this, so don't worry. Have a nice life. That's actually when it starts going down. Okay, it's like 1990 kind of thing. We all did exponentially stupid shit when we were younger. Like, I mean, exponentially stupid. Like, how many of us have, like, gotten drunk in a field and fallen asleep under a dumpster? And now kids these days, like late teens, early 20s, they don't do that. They don't do that. For example, Reno's son and his best friend just got a license and just got his car. So when I was 17, 18, and that happened to me, we were out causing havoc. We were out wreaking havoc. We were out being ridiculous and bad and all the other things. Do you know what Reno's son and his best friend did? They went to Costco and bought hot dogs and a cheesecake. That's what they did. And they weren't high. My friends and I would have hotboxed the car all the way to Costco. We wouldn't have made it to Costco. We would have made it to the 7-Eleven and down the street because we would have got paranoid that we would have been arrested. See the difference? Anyways, that is my little view on this and how I behaved when I was that age. Mind you, my IQ, and I've been tested, is very high, which is kind of cool. I guess I missed out on that. But that not having the ability to safety myself was definitely a thing when I was younger. And now that I'm older, I'm like, safety. And now that I have Reno, I'm also like, safety. And that I'm sick, it's also like, oh my God, safety. I have to safety. Like, I have to safety. It's a thing that I need to do. You're probably thinking, Josie, what the hell does this have to do with serial killers? I'm going to tell you. So minus, like, the huge serial killers that we talk about, like Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes and all those people, those were in the 1880s. Or actually, there was one lady, Elizabeth Bathory, from 1560 to 1614, who killed like 600 people because she wanted eternal youth or something. That's just crazy. So crazy was back then, too. There was also a woman, Belle Gunness, in the States from 1859 to 1930 was her lifespan. She killed like 40 people and left them on her property, and they were found in 1908. Then she burnt her house down and faked her death so she could get away with it. No one ever found her. So there's the odd whack job through history, but there's the golden age of serial killers. From 1970 to the year 2000 is the golden age of serial killers. In 1987, there was 198 active serial killers in the United States. In 2018, there were 12. Before 1940, they're not sure how many serial killers were in the United States. I looked into it, and there were a couple, but they don't have exact numbers because, well, it was way back in the day, and we didn't have ways of looking through everything and just kind of digging up all that old data. It's cold cases. It's cold cases. Anyways, well, there are a lot of factors why there are less serial killers nowadays, including no lead in gasoline and paint, There's better forensics. There's less use of parole. So people don't get out on parole as much as they used to. Public behavior. So we're more diligent, we are more cautious, and we are more careful of our surroundings. The ability to track people with tech is another really, really huge thing that stopped a lot of these murders. Forensics, like I mentioned, the forensic science from even 10 years ago to now is so advanced. Also, mental health treatment. Mental health treatment is a big one, and being able to see and do something about the people who are at risk for becoming serial killers. Like, you can see the tendencies and you can put those people in a mental institution or on medication or whatnot. There's a very famous case here in Canada about the guy who beheaded some people on a bus, and anyway, I don't even want to get into that. That's another thing. Most serial killers are between 25 and 35, and I think that's just for physicality, and most of them are white males. Most. I'm not saying all, I'm saying most. And I think it has to do with physicality for the age range 25 to 35, because bodies are heavy. Let's be really honest, and trying to kill somebody who's struggling and wants to stay alive would probably be very difficult. Like, I took martial arts. I have my purple belt in Shotokan, and trying to take down another person is really hard. It's really hard. Even when you have skills, it is increasingly difficult the older you get. Most serial killers have a little bit of an above average IQ, considered bright and normal, which is about 113. That's not bad. That's not bad. Disorganized serial killers have a normal IQ of around 93. There is exceptions, like Ed Kemper. I guess his IQ was 136. Not as smart as me. He was actually caught and convinced psychologists and a psychiatrist that he was fine and wouldn't reoffend. He went out and killed 8 more people after they released him. Okay? So there's that level of crazy and that level of intelligence, but he was an exception to the rule. I feel in that case, it could have been upbringing, leaded gasoline, just a bunch of different factors. And sometimes you're just born a sociopath or a psychopath, and that's just what happens. So I'm going to put this up on the screen as I'm talking about this. It's really interesting with the correlation between having lead in our gasoline and when it first started being added to gas and the birthdays, and when it was in gas for a longer period of time, the birthdays. So the mothers and the children were exposed to leaded gasoline. And you'll see that these killers started killing at an earlier age the later they were born. I think that's because the mothers were exposed to leaded gas as well as the children. Correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Albert DeSalvo, Boston Strangler, 1931 to 1973, age 30-ish. John Wayne Gacy, 1942 to 1994, age 30-ish. I'm saying 30-ish because a lot of times it's not exactly known when they started, but it's what's on record of this is the year of their first kill. Rodney Alcala, the dating game guy, 1943 to 2021, age 30-ish. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, 1945 to he's still alive, age 29. Ted Bundy, 1946 to 1989. He confessed to 36. Experts think it's closer to 100. He was 27 or 30 because they're not 100% sure when he started killing people. Peter Sutcliffe, he's the Yorkshire Ripper, 1946 to 2020, age 29. So that just proves they had leaded gasoline all over the world. The Son of Sam guy, David Berkowitz. I might be saying that wrong. 1953 to still alive. He was age 25, but notice he was born in the 50s. So he started killing at an earlier age, and it could have been because his mother had been exposed to leaded gasoline her entire life. And then he's exposed to it right out of the womb. Joel Rifkin, age 30, 1959. So that one puts a little bit of a hamper on my theory, But he could also just be a psychopath, and we don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's why it's a little bit inconclusive. Jeffrey Dahmer, 1960 to 1944, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. He started killing people at age 18. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, 1960 to 2013, age 24. Canada's most famous serial killer, Robert Pickton, 1949 to 2024. He died last year, but he apparently started committing crimes and killing people at age 29. He's a very interesting case because he's the pig farmer. He's the pig farmer. And different movies have been made about him. There was actually a Criminal Minds 2-part episode that was based on it. They don't know how many people he killed. He confessed, I think it was 39. They convicted him on 7 or 9. They had other cases up to 20-something. Some people think it's in the hundreds of people that he killed. Is leaded gasoline directly linked to serial killers? In my opinion, yes. In my opinion, yes. It's directly linked to neurological development, causing hyperactivity, causing behavioral issues, causing neurological issues. It's directly linked to violent crimes. So yes, in my conclusion, leaded gasoline is absolutely linked to serial killers. And our decline in serial killers is probably because of less lead in our atmosphere, as well as all of the other things that I mentioned. We're just getting better at tracking people and recognizing mental health issues. What a crazy ride that was. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And if you have anything you want me to talk about, leave it down below. I think I am going to get more into the gasoline thing and the corporate greed and just why everything was overlooked. It's kind of like light bulbs. You know what I mean? If you guys haven't heard about that one, I'm going to do a video on light bulbs too. Anywho, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys tune in for more deeper dives into things like this. If there's any other information you have, just leave it down below. Or if there's anything you want me to talk about, also leave it down below. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye!